Everything changed the moment a billionaire father discovers Maid's secret after dyslexic son gets straight A's after years of struggle. The mahogany doors of the Pemberton estate's private study burst open with such force that the antique bronze handles struck the marble walls with a resounding crack. 43-year-old tech billionaire Harrison Pemberton stood frozen in the doorway, his usually composed features twisted in complete bewilderment as he stared at the academic report clutched in his trembling hands. This can't be right," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the cavernous room lined with first-edition books he'd never opened. "Welcome home to Stories with Goodness, beautiful souls. If this is your first time joining our family, please drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. I absolutely love connecting with beautiful hearts all around the world and lifting each other up in love and support. Now, let's take a moment to center our hearts. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together today to witness this powerful story of recognition and redemption. Help us to open our eyes to see the gifts and talents in those around us, just as you see the potential in each of us. Guide our hearts to appreciate the helpers you've placed in our lives, and remind us that wisdom and worth come in many forms. Amen. Trust me, this story will touch your heart, and yes, I have a feeling it's going to move you deeply. Please show your love by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. Your support helps us share these life-changing stories of hope, transformation, and the power of seeing people for who they truly are. We're building something beautiful together here at Stories with Goodness, and every subscription helps us reach more hearts that need these messages of love and recognition. Let me tell you this heartwarming story. Please stay with me. The official letterhead from Westfield Preparatory Academy seemed to mock him with its gold embossing, and the grades listed beside his son's name defied everything he thought he knew about his own child. Reading comprehension, A+. 98%. Basic math/addition and subtraction, A, 94%. Science exploration, A+, 96%. Social studies, A, 91%. Writing skills, A, 93%. Overall result, distinction. 8-year-old Timothy Pemberton, his dyslexic son who'd struggled through 3 expensive private tutors, 2 learning specialists, and countless hours of educational therapy, had somehow achieved near-perfect grades. The same child who'd been written off by Manhattan's most elite educational consultants was being recommended for the advanced reading group. Harrison's hands shook as he read the principal's handwritten note at the bottom. Timothy's transformation has been remarkable. His reading comprehension and mathematical reasoning show exceptional growth. Whatever changes you've made at home are working beautifully. He credits his success to Miss Rosa's special teaching. Please extend our gratitude to this remarkable educator. Miss Rosa. Rosa Martinez, their 52-year-old housekeeper who'd worked quietly in their household for the past 6 years. The woman he'd barely acknowledged beyond basic pleasantries, who cleaned their mansion, prepared their meals, and apparently, unknown to him, had been secretly educating his son. The irony crashed over him like a tidal wave. He'd spent over $200,000 in the past 2 years alone on Timothy's education, private specialists, cutting-edge learning programs, even flying in experts from Switzerland. Yet his breakthrough had come from their housekeeper, a woman he'd never even asked about her background, who earned $800 a week to maintain their 12,000-square-foot home. Harrison's mind flashed back to all the times he dismissed Timothy's struggles as laziness or lack of focus. The heated arguments with his late wife about whether their son was just not applying himself. The shame he'd felt during parent-teacher conferences when Timothy's previous teachers described him as unfocused and behind grade level. The guilt that had eaten at him since Maria's death, wondering if his son's struggles were somehow his fault as a single father who was always traveling for business. He remembered the last tutor, Dr. Whitfield, a stern woman with credentials from Harvard who charged $300 per hour and made Timothy cry during their sessions. She'd recommended placing him in a special needs program, suggesting that his dyslexia would prevent him from ever achieving academic success in a traditional classroom setting. "Timothy!" Harrison called out, his voice echoing through the mansion's marble corridors. "Timothy!" The sound of small footsteps thundered down the grand staircase as his son appeared, his dark hair still tousled from his after-school nap, clutching his favorite worn stuffed elephant that Rosa had sewn back together countless times. Harrison had offered to buy Timothy dozens of new stuffed animals, expensive, perfect ones from F.E.O. Schwartz, but his son had always chosen the threadbare elephant that Rosa had lovingly repaired with mismatched fabric. "Yes, Daddy." Timothy's voice carried that careful tone children use when they're unsure if they're in trouble. It was a tone that broke Harrison's heart every time he heard it, a reminder of how often their interactions had been tense during the struggles with homework and tutoring. Harrison knelt down, bringing himself to his son's eye level, studying the intelligent brown eyes that looked so much like his late wife's. Maria would have known what to do. She'd always been better with Timothy, more patient, more intuitive about his needs. "Timothy, this report from school. These grades are incredible. Your teacher says you've been doing amazing work." A brilliant smile spread across Timothy's face, the kind of pure joy that had been absent for too long during their struggles with traditional tutoring methods. It was the smile Harrison remembered from when Timothy was younger, before the academic pressure had dimmed his natural enthusiasm for learning. "Miss Rosa has been helping me. She teaches me after my homework, and she makes everything make sense. She says my brain just works differently, like a special computer that processes things in a unique way." Harrison felt a lump forming in his throat. For 2 years, he'd paid experts to tell his son what was wrong with him. Rosa had apparently spent her time telling Timothy what was special about him. "Miss Rosa." Harrison repeated, though he already knew the answer. "She's the best teacher in the whole world, Daddy. She doesn't make me feel stupid when I mix up letters or when reading feels like the words are dancing. She taught me tricks to remember math, and she reads stories with me using different voices for all the characters." Timothy's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "Yesterday she showed me how to build a volcano for science class, and we talked about how the same pressure that creates problems can also create beautiful things like diamonds." Harrison's breath caught. The metaphor was perfect, and probably lost on most adults, but clearly meaningful to his 8-year-old son. Rosa had managed to reframe Timothy's learning differences as a form of special pressure that could create something beautiful, rather than something broken that needed fixing. "She says I'm like a detective," Timothy continued, bouncing slightly on his toes the way he did when he was excited. "When I read, my brain looks for clues and puts puzzles together in ways other kids don't think of. And in math, she taught me to see numbers as friends that want to play together instead of scary things that fight with me." Harrison realized he was witnessing something profound. Rosa hadn't just taught Timothy academic skills, she'd completely transformed his relationship with learning itself. She'd taken a child who'd begun to see himself as broken and helped him discover he was gifted. "Where is Miss Rosa now, son?" "She's in the kitchen making my snack. She always makes sure I eat something healthy before we do lessons. She says a good brain needs good food." Timothy's eyes lit up even brighter. "Daddy, can I show you the story I wrote? Miss Rosa helped me, but she said all the ideas came from my special brain." The phrase special brain instead of learning disability or dyslexia struck Harrison powerfully. Rosa had taken the clinical language that had made Timothy feel defective and replaced it with words that made him feel gifted. Before Harrison could answer, Timothy was already racing toward the kitchen, his small feet pattering against the Italian marble floors. Harrison followed, his $3,000 Italian leather shoes clicking in rhythm with his racing heartbeat, each step carrying him toward a reckoning he hadn't seen coming. The kitchen was the heart of their home in ways Harrison had never fully appreciated. It was filled with the warm aroma of fresh-baked cookies and the sound of gentle humming. Rosa Martinez stood at the counter, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in her usual neat bun, wearing the simple blue uniform she'd worn every day for 6 years. She was carefully arranging apple slices in the shape of a flower and placing them next to a glass of milk. Not just a snack, but a small work of art designed to make an 8-year-old boy smile. But Harrison was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. The kitchen walls were decorated with Timothy's artwork, drawings and projects that Harrison now realized Rosa had been encouraging and displaying long before he'd paid attention. A handmade solar system hung from the ceiling, clearly a collaborative effort. Math worksheets were arranged on a bulletin board, each one marked with gold star stickers and encouraging notes written in Rosa's careful handwriting. Rosa looked up as they entered, and Harrison caught something in her expression, a moment of fear, quickly masked. She'd worked for enough wealthy families to recognize the look on an employer's face when they were about to deliver news that could change everything. Her eyes darted to the report card in Harrison's hand, and he saw her unconsciously straighten her shoulders, preparing for whatever was coming. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pemberton," she said quietly, her slight accent lending warmth to the formal greeting. Even now, even after 6 years and clearly after developing a profound bond with his son, she maintained the professional distance that her position required. "Miss Rosa." Timothy bounded toward her, wrapping his arms around her waist in an enthusiastic hug. The gesture was so natural, so full of genuine affection, that Harrison realized this happened every day. His son had been coming home to loving arms, encouragement, and genuine care, while Harrison had been traveling the world building his tech empire. "Daddy saw my report card. Tell him about our lessons." Rosa's eyes darted nervously to Harrison's face, trying to read his expression. Her hands instinctively moved to smooth down her uniform, a gesture Harrison recognized as anxiety. He realized that Rosa had no idea whether he was angry about her involvement in Timothy's education or grateful for it. I hope I didn't overstep, Mr. Pemberton," she began carefully, her voice carrying the caution of someone who'd learned to navigate the complex dynamics of working in wealthy households. "Timothy seemed to struggle with his homework, and I just wanted to help. I have some experience with children who learn differently, and I thought perhaps—" Harrison held up the academic report, his voice catching slightly as he spoke. "Rosa, these are Timothy's grades. A's across the board. His teacher wants to know about his miraculous transformation." Rosa's eyes widened as she took in the grades, and for the first time since Harrison had known her, she allowed herself a genuine smile of pride. It was the smile of a teacher seeing her student succeed, and Harrison realized he'd never seen her drop her professional mask before. "Timothy is brilliant, Mr. Pemberton. He just needed someone to see how his mind works. Traditional methods weren't reaching him, but once I understood his learning style—" She trailed off, perhaps realizing she was speaking more freely than she ever had before. "You understood his learning style?" Harrison interrupted, not harshly, but with genuine curiosity. "Rosa, forgive me, but I don't know anything about your background. How did you know how to help him when certified specialists couldn't?" Timothy had settled at the kitchen counter with his snack, completely absorbed in a book that Rosa had obviously helped him select, something that months ago would have been impossible for him to read independently. Harrison noticed that Rosa had bookmarked several pages with small sticky notes. Probably discussion questions or vocabulary words they'd explore together. Rosa took a deep breath, her hands clasped in front of her. For a moment, Harrison saw her wrestle with how much to reveal, how much of her story was safe to share with an employer who'd never asked about her life before. "Before I came to America, I was a special education teacher in Guatemala for 15 years. I worked with children who had dyslexia, ADHD, and other learning differences. When I moved here, my credentials weren't recognized and—" She paused, her voice growing quieter. Well, I needed work to support my family. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. For 6 years, he'd had a certified special education teacher in his home, someone who dedicated her career to helping children exactly like Timothy, and he'd never bothered to ask about her background. He'd seen her only as the help, never as a professional, never as someone with expertise and experience that could be invaluable to his struggling son. "You've been teaching for 15 years, he repeated slowly, the magnitude of his oversight settling over him like a weight. 18 now, Rosa corrected gently. The 3 years I spent working with Timothy have been some of the most rewarding of my career. He's such a special boy, Mr. Pemberton. His mind works in ways that will serve him well in life, especially in creative and analytical thinking. He just needed someone to believe in him and teach him to believe in himself." Harrison watched his son contentedly reading, the struggle and frustration that had marked homework time for years completely absent. Timothy was unconsciously moving his lips slightly as he read, but his posture was relaxed, confident. This was the child Harrison had always hoped to see, engaged, happy, proud of his own abilities. "Rosa," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't accustomed to showing in front of employees. "I owe you an apology. I owe you much more than that, actually." Rosa shook her head quickly, her professional instincts kicking in. "No apology necessary, Mr. Pemberton. Helping Timothy has been my joy." "But there is," Harrison insisted, his voice growing stronger as the full weight of the situation crystallized for him. "I never asked about your qualifications, your background, your expertise. I made assumptions based on prejudice I didn't even realize I had. You've given my son something I couldn't buy with all my money, confidence in his own abilities." Timothy looked up from his book, sensing the serious tone of the conversation. "Daddy, Miss Rosa taught me that being different isn't being broken. She said some of the smartest people in the world have brains like mine, like Albert Einstein and Richard Branson. She said my dyslexia might actually be a superpower if I learned to use it right." Harrison felt tears prick his eyes, something that hadn't happened since his wife's funeral 3 years earlier. "She's absolutely right, son." Rosa stepped forward, her professional instincts taking over as she recognized Harrison's genuine desire to understand. "Mr. Pemberton, if I may, Timothy has incredible potential. His spatial reasoning is exceptional, his creative thinking is advanced, and once he learned to work with his dyslexia instead of against it, his reading comprehension soared. He needs to continue building on these strengths." Harrison looked around the kitchen with new eyes, seeing all the evidence of Rosa's teaching that he'd missed. The math games disguised as cooking activities. The science experiments that had left harmless stains on the counter that he'd never questioned. The reading corner she'd created in the breakfast nook, complete with comfortable cushions and good lighting. "Will you?" Harrison began, then stopped, realizing he was about to ask her to continue doing something she'd already been doing without recognition or proper compensation for her expertise. "Rosa, would you be willing to continue working with Timothy, but as his official tutor? With proper pay for your expertise and qualifications?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears, and Harrison realized this might be the first time in years that someone had recognized her professional worth. "Mr. Pemberton, I would be honored." "Miss Rosa," Timothy interjected, looking up from his book with excitement, "does this mean we can keep doing science experiments in the kitchen?" Rosa laughed, the sound warming the sterile kitchen more than any expensive renovation could. "Of course, Mijo. We have a solar system model to build next week, remember?" Harrison realized he was witnessing something he'd been too blind and too arrogant to see before, a teacher who truly understood his child, and a child who was thriving under her guidance. All the money he'd spent, all the experts he'd consulted, and the answer had been in his own home the entire time. But more than that, he was seeing the profound impact of recognition and respect. Rosa hadn't just been helping Timothy learn. She'd been pouring her professional expertise and personal care into a child who needed both. And she'd been doing it while he'd remained oblivious to her qualifications and contributions. The realization was humbling and transformative. Harrison understood now that he'd been living in a house filled with people he'd never really seen, never really known. Rosa had been not just their housekeeper, but Timothy's champion, advocate, and the key to unlocking his potential. As he watched Timothy return to his reading and Rosa begin preparing dinner with the same care and attention she brought to everything, Harrison felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of worth, expertise, and the profound impact of truly seeing the people around him. This moment, standing in his kitchen, finally understanding what had been happening under his own roof, would change everything that came next. 3 hours later, Harrison found himself doing something he'd never done in 6 years of employing Rosa Martinez. He knocked on her small apartment door above the garage and asked if they could talk. Rosa opened the door with obvious surprise, quickly smoothing her casual clothes and stepping aside to let him in. Her living space was modest but immaculately organized, with one wall completely covered in educational materials, teaching certificates, and photos of children, clearly former students from her years in Guatemala. "Mr. Pemberton, is everything all right? Is Timothy okay?" Rosa's concern was immediate and genuine, her first thought always for the child she'd been quietly nurturing. "Timothy's fine. Better than fine, actually." Harrison's eyes swept the room, taking in details he'd never bothered to notice before. "Rosa, I need to understand something. How long have you been helping Timothy with his schoolwork?" Rosa gestured for him to sit on her small couch, then settled into the chair across from him, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Almost from the beginning, Mr. Pemberton. About 5 years ago, I started noticing him struggling with his homework at the kitchen table. He would get so frustrated, sometimes even crying over simple reading assignments." Harrison's chest tightened. 5 years. Timothy had been suffering, and Rosa had been helping, while he'd been completely oblivious, focused on board meetings and acquisition deals. "I remember one afternoon," Rosa continued, her voice soft with memory. "Timothy was trying to read a story about a boy and his dog. He kept mixing up B and D, getting more upset with each mistake. The tutor you had then, Mrs. Richardson, she was getting impatient with him, making him start over each time he made an error." Harrison winced. He remembered Mrs. Richardson, a stern woman who charged $200 an hour and believed in discipline and repetition as the cure for learning differences. After she left, Timothy was sitting at the table crying. He said he was stupid and would never learn to read like other kids. Rosa's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Pemberton, I couldn't just walk away from that. So I sat with him, and I tried a different approach." "What kind of approach?" Harrison leaned forward, genuinely curious about methods that had succeeded where expensive specialists had failed. Rosa stood and moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a worn notebook filled with handwritten lesson plans and strategies. "In Guatemala, I worked with many children like Timothy. Dyslexia doesn't make a child less intelligent, it just means their brain processes information differently. Traditional teaching methods often work against how these children naturally learn." She opened the notebook, showing Harrison pages of carefully documented strategies, progress notes, and creative lesson plans. "For Timothy, I discovered he's a kinesthetic learner. He needs to move and touch to understand. When we read together, I let him trace letters in sand or rice. For math, we use building blocks and counting games. Everything is hands-on, visual, and connected to things he cares about." Harrison stared at the detailed notes, realizing Rosa had been keeping more comprehensive records of his son's educational progress than any of the expensive specialists he'd hired. Every page showed careful observation, thoughtful adaptation, and genuine insight into how Timothy's mind worked. "This is incredible work, Rosa. This is professional-level educational planning." Rosa smiled modestly. "It's what I was trained to do, Mr. Pemberton. In Guatemala, I had my own classroom for children with learning differences. I held a master's degree in special education from Universidad Rafael Landivar." Harrison felt another wave of shock. A master's degree? "When I came to America 12 years ago, the credential recognition process was complicated and expensive. I needed to work immediately to support my daughter and my mother, so I took domestic work while trying to navigate the system." Rosa's voice carried no bitterness, just matter-of-fact acceptance of the challenges many immigrants faced. "The families I worked for needed help, and I needed employment. It was a practical solution." "But you're a teacher," Harrison said, still processing the magnitude of what he'd missed. "You're not just a teacher, you're exactly the kind of specialist I've been paying thousands of dollars to find." Rosa nodded gently. "I've been teaching Timothy the way I taught my students in Guatemala. The only difference is that we do it in your kitchen instead of a classroom, and you call me your housekeeper instead of your son's teacher." The weight of his blindness settled over Harrison like a physical burden. "Rosa, I've been paying Dr. Whitfield $300 an hour to make Timothy feel inadequate, while you've been helping him excel for no additional compensation at all." "Mr. Pemberton," Rosa said carefully, "Timothy is a remarkable child. His mind works in ways that will serve him well in life. Dyslexic children often become innovative thinkers, entrepreneurs, artists. They see patterns and solutions others miss. Timothy just needed someone to teach him to see his differences as strengths, not deficits." Harrison thought about his own company, built on innovative thinking and seeing opportunities others missed. Some of his most successful executives were people who thought differently, who approached problems from unique angles. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Show me how you teach him." Rosa looked surprised. "Now, please. I want to understand." Rosa moved to a cabinet and pulled out several containers: rice, sand, letter tiles, colorful blocks, and various textured materials. Timothy's brain needs multiple sensory inputs to process information effectively. Traditional methods rely too heavily on visual and auditory learning, but Timothy needs to feel and move to understand. She demonstrated techniques she developed specifically for Timothy, tracing letters in rice to build muscle memory, using colored blocks to understand math concepts, creating stories with physical props to improve reading comprehension. "When Timothy reads, I never make him sit still," Rosa explained, arranging the materials as she spoke. "He walks around, acts out the stories, draws pictures of what he's reading. Movement helps his brain process the information." Harrison watched in fascination as Rosa showed him game-based learning approaches, multisensory reading techniques, and confidence-building strategies that were clearly the result of years of professional training and experience. For math, we use what he loves: dinosaurs, spaceships, his favorite characters. If Timothy needs to learn addition, we count dinosaur toys. For subtraction, spaceships blast off. Everything connects to his interests and uses his natural curiosity. The approach was so different from the rigid, repetitive methods of the tutors he'd hired. Rosa had created a learning environment built around Timothy's strengths rather than focused on his deficits. "Rosa," Harrison said slowly, "you've been giving Timothy individualized special education services that would cost thousands of dollars from a qualified specialist. And you are a qualified specialist." "I've been helping a child who needed support," Rosa replied simply. "It's what teachers do." Harrison stood and moved to the wall of teaching certificates and photos. The documents were in Spanish, but he could make out enough to understand their significance: graduate degrees, teaching certifications, recognition awards from schools and educational organizations. "These children," he said, pointing to the photos of smiling students, "they were your students in Guatemala?" Rosa's face lit up with pride. Yes. Many of them had learning differences, behavioral challenges, or came from difficult circumstances. But every child has potential, Mr. Pemberton. They just need someone to believe in them and find the right way to reach them. Harrison studied the photos, children of various ages, all looking happy and confident in their classroom setting. Rosa stood among them in several pictures, clearly beloved by her students, clearly in her element as an educator. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your background?" Harrison asked gently. Rosa considered the question carefully. "Mr. Pemberton, in my experience working for wealthy families, sharing too much personal information can make employers uncomfortable. They prefer to maintain clear boundaries between their lives and their staff's lives. I learned it was better to focus on my duties and not complicate the relationship." Harrison felt a deep shame at her words. Rosa had learned to hide her qualifications and expertise because employers like him didn't want to see their domestic staff as whole, complex people with their own professional identities. "Also," Rosa continued, "I needed this job to support my family. If I had presented myself as an overqualified teacher rather than a housekeeper, you might not have hired me. Domestic work was more readily available than teaching positions for someone without recognized American credentials." The practical realities of Rosa's situation struck Harrison powerfully. She'd taken a job far below her qualifications out of necessity, then used her hidden expertise to help his son without recognition or additional compensation, all while maintaining the professional distance her employers expected. "Your daughter," Harrison said, remembering Rosa had mentioned a child. "How old is she?" Rosa's smile became even brighter. "Carmen is 16 now. She's a junior in high school, honor roll, planning to study education like her mother. She wants to be a teacher too." "She must be proud of you," Harrison said. "I hope so," Rosa replied. "I tell her every day that education is the most powerful tool for changing your life. No one can take your knowledge away from you, and learning opens doors that seemed impossible before." Harrison realized Rosa had been living this principle, using her education to help Timothy even when her credentials weren't officially recognized, continuing to teach even when she couldn't do it in a formal classroom setting. "Rosa, I need to ask you something important," Harrison said, returning to sit across from her. "Would you be willing to become Timothy's official tutor? Not just helping with homework, but designing a comprehensive educational program for him, with proper compensation for your expertise and qualifications." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Pemberton, I would be honored. Working with Timothy has reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. Seeing him discover his capabilities, watching his confidence grow, it's been the most rewarding part of my day." "There's something else," Harrison continued. "I'd like to help you get your teaching credentials recognized here in New York. Timothy shouldn't be the only child who benefits from your expertise." Rosa sat back in her chair, clearly overwhelmed. "Mr. Pemberton, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Harrison replied. "Say you'll help me understand how to support Timothy properly. Say you'll let me help you get back to doing what you're clearly meant to do, teaching children who need exactly what you have to offer." Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." As Harrison sat in Rosa's small apartment, surrounded by evidence of her professional expertise and dedication to education, he realized this conversation was changing everything. He wasn't just discovering that Timothy had a gifted teacher, he was discovering that he'd been blind to the extraordinary people in his own household. The transformation had begun, but Harrison sensed this was only the beginning of understanding how much he'd missed and how much needed to change. The following Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor that would change everything. Harrison was in his home office reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant buzzed him with an urgent message. "Mr. Pemberton, there's a Dr. Victoria Ashworth here to see you. She says it's about Timothy's education and won't take no for an answer." Harrison frowned. He didn't recognize the name, but something about the urgency made him agree to the meeting. Minutes later, a sharply dressed woman in her 50s swept into his office, her designer handbag and imperious manner immediately setting him on edge. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm Dr. Victoria Ashworth, Director of the Elite Academic Assessment Center." Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with wealthy families. "I understand there's been some irregularity regarding your son's recent academic improvement." "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Harrison replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Timothy's grades have improved dramatically. That's hardly irregular." Dr. Ashworth settled into the chair across from his desk, pulling out an expensive leather portfolio. "Mr. Pemberton, I've been contacted by several concerned colleagues in the educational community. It seems Timothy's transformation has raised some red flags." Red flags. Harrison's voice carried a warning edge. Children with severe dyslexia don't simply overcome their learning disabilities overnight, Dr. Ashworth continued, her tone condescending. "When a child goes from struggling with basic reading to achieving A-level work in a matter of months, it typically indicates academic dishonesty." Harrison felt his blood pressure rising. "Are you suggesting my son is cheating?" "I'm suggesting that someone is doing his work for him," Dr. Ashworth replied coolly. "Our investigation indicates that your domestic staff has been overstepping boundaries. Specifically, your housekeeper has been inappropriately involved in Timothy's education." The word investigation hit Harrison like a slap. "You've been investigating my family?" The Elite Academic Assessment Center monitors unusual academic patterns among students in prestigious schools, Dr. Ashworth explained as if this were perfectly reasonable. "When a learning-disabled child suddenly excels, it damages the integrity of the educational system. We have protocols for these situations." Harrison stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "Dr. Ashworth, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Timothy's improvement is legitimate." "Mr. Pemberton, please sit down." Dr. Ashworth's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations with wealthy parents. "I've dealt with these situations before. Domestic staff often develop inappropriate attachments to the children in their care. They mean well, but they don't understand the long-term damage they cause by enabling academic dependency." Enabling. Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "Your housekeeper, a Miss Martinez, I believe, has been observed teaching Timothy using methods that are questionable for someone without proper educational credentials. She's likely doing his assignments, helping him cheat on tests, or providing inappropriate assistance that creates artificial improvement." Harrison felt fury building in his chest, but before he could respond, a small voice interrupted from the doorway. "Daddy." Timothy stood in the entrance to the office, his school backpack still on his shoulders, his face confused and worried. "Mrs. Chen from school dropped me off early because of the assembly." "Who's the lady?" Dr. Ashworth turned toward Timothy with the kind of smile adults use when they're about to interrogate a child. "Hello, Timothy. I'm Dr. Ashworth. I'm here to talk to your father about your schoolwork." Timothy's face immediately became guarded. At 8 years old, he'd already learned to be wary of adults who wanted to discuss his learning differences. "Timothy," Dr. Ashworth continued, "I'd like to ask you some questions about how you've been doing your homework lately. Has someone been helping you more than usual?" Miss Rosa helps me, Timothy said simply, moving closer to his father's side. Ah yes, Miss Rosa. Dr. Ashworth's tone turned patronizing. And what exactly does Miss Rosa do to help you, sweetie? Timothy looked confused by the woman's tone. She teaches me. She makes learning fun and helps me understand when I get confused. Does Miss Rosa ever do your homework for you? Dr. Ashworth pressed, pulling out a notebook to record Timothy's responses. No. Timothy's voice was indignant. Miss Rosa says cheating means you don't really learn anything. She makes me do all my own work, but she shows me tricks to remember things better. Dr. Ashworth made a note, clearly unconvinced. And these tricks, do they involve Miss Rosa giving you answers to test questions? Timothy's face scrunched up in confusion. No, she teaches me how to figure out answers myself. Like when I mix up letters, she taught me to trace them in rice so my fingers remember the right way. And for math, we use dinosaur toys to count because dinosaurs are my favorite. I see. Dr. Ashworth's tone suggested she saw exactly what she'd expected to see, evidence of inappropriate assistance. Timothy, here's what I think has been happening. Miss Rosa has been making school too easy for you, hasn't she? She's been giving you shortcuts and help that other children don't get. Timothy's eyes began to fill with tears. Miss Rosa says I'm smart. She says my brain just works differently, like a special computer. Oh, honey, Dr. Ashworth's voice dripped with false sympathy. Miss Rosa shouldn't be telling you things like that. She's not a real teacher, sweetie. She's just the cleaning lady. Real teachers know that children with learning problems like yours need special schools, not pretend lessons from someone who doesn't understand education. The room went dead silent. Harrison felt something snap inside him as he watched his son's face crumple at Dr. Ashworth's words. Timothy had been building confidence for months, finally believing in his own abilities, and this woman was systematically destroying that progress with her cruel dismissal of both his capabilities and Rosa's expertise. Timothy, Harrison said gently, please go find Miss Rosa. Tell her I'd like her to join us in my office. As Timothy left, wiping tears from his eyes, Harrison turned back to Dr. Ashworth with barely controlled fury. Dr. Ashworth, I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain why you think you have the right to come into my home and interrogate my child. Mr. Pemberton, I understand you're defensive, but you need to face reality. Your domestic worker has overstepped her bounds. She's created an artificial learning environment that will ultimately harm Timothy when he encounters real academic challenges. Real academic challenges? Harrison's voice was ice cold. Timothy is getting straight A's in his current program. Artificially inflated grades achieved through inappropriate assistance, Dr. Ashworth dismissed. When Timothy faces standardized testing or moves to higher grade levels, this house of cards will collapse. The kindest thing you can do is end this charade now and enroll him in an appropriate special needs program. At that moment, Rosa appeared in the doorway with Timothy close behind her. She took one look at the scene, Harrison's furious expression, Timothy's tear-stained face, and Dr. Ashworth's condescending posture, and immediately understood the situation. Mr. Pemberton, Rosa said quietly, Timothy said you wanted to see me? Dr. Ashworth turned toward Rosa with a kind of dismissive look reserved for service staff who'd forgotten their place. Ah, Miss Martinez. I'm Dr. Victoria Ashworth from the Elite Academic Assessment Center. I'm here to discuss your inappropriate involvement in Timothy's education. Rosa's expression remained calm, but Harrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I helped Timothy with his homework, as Mr. Pemberton has asked me to do. Help. Dr. Ashworth's laugh was sharp and mocking. Miss Martinez, you've been playing teacher with this child, filling his head with false confidence about abilities he simply doesn't possess. Timothy has severe learning disabilities that require professional intervention, not kitchen table tutoring from domestic staff. Rosa's voice remained steady. Timothy is a very intelligent child who learns differently than some others. Miss Martinez, Dr. Ashworth's tone turned patronizing, I appreciate that you care about Timothy, but you need to understand your limitations. You clean houses for a living. Education is a complex field that requires years of training and professional expertise. What you've been doing, however well-intentioned, is actually harmful to this child's development. Harrison watched Rosa's face carefully, seeing her struggle to maintain professional composure in the face of such blatant disrespect. I understand your concerns, Rosa replied diplomatically. Do you? Dr. Ashworth stood up, moving closer to Rosa in a clear power play. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've manipulated a vulnerable family situation to inflate your own importance. You've convinced a grieving father and a learning disabled child that you're some kind of educational savior, when in reality, you're just the help who's gotten ideas above your station. The room went silent except for Timothy's soft sniffling. Harrison felt his fury reach a breaking point, but before he could speak, something shifted in Rosa's demeanor. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that filled the room. Dr. Ashworth, Rosa said calmly, before you continue insulting my qualifications, perhaps you should know that I hold a master's degree in special education from Universidad Rafael Landivar. I spent 15 years as a certified special education teacher in Guatemala, specializing in dyslexia and learning differences. I've worked with hundreds of children exactly like Timothy. Dr. Ashworth's condescending expression faltered slightly. That's impossible. You're a housekeeper. I am a housekeeper, Rosa agreed, her voice growing stronger. I'm also a trained educator who has been using evidence-based teaching methods to help Timothy overcome the same learning challenges that so-called professional educators told his father were insurmountable. Even if that were true, Dr. Ashworth recovered quickly, foreign credentials hardly qualify you to interfere with American educational standards. Rosa reached into her pocket and pulled out Timothy's report card, the one that had started this entire revelation. These aren't foreign credentials, Dr. Ashworth. These are American grades, earned by an American student, using teaching methods that work. Dr. Ashworth snatched the report card, scanning the grades with obvious disbelief. This is exactly what I'm talking about. These grades are artificially inflated. No truly dyslexic child achieves this level of academic success without. Without what? Rosa interrupted, her professional composure finally cracking. Without someone believing in him? Without someone taking the time to understand how his mind works? Without someone teaching him that different doesn't mean defective? You are not qualified, Dr. Ashworth began. I am more qualified than the 3 tutors Mr. Pemberton hired before me, Rosa stated firmly. I am more qualified than the specialists who told Timothy he would never read at grade level. And I am certainly more qualified than someone who walks into a child's home and tells him he's not smart enough to earn the grades he's worked so hard to achieve. Dr. Ashworth's face flushed with anger. How dare you? I have a doctorate from Columbia University. I've published research papers on learning disabilities. I am the director of the most prestigious educational assessment center in Manhattan. You are a domestic worker who cleans toilets for a living. The words hung in the air like poison. Timothy began crying harder, and Harrison felt his restraint finally snap completely. But before he could explode, Rosa stepped forward, her voice carrying a quiet dignity that made Dr. Ashworth's shouting seem small and petty. You're right, Dr. Ashworth, Rosa said calmly. I do clean toilets. I also cook meals, do laundry, and maintain this household. But you know what else I do." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I see potential where you see problems. I build confidence where you create shame. I help children discover their gifts instead of cataloging their deficits." Rosa moved to stand next to Timothy, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "Timothy is brilliant, and his recent academic success isn't artificial. It's the result of teaching methods that actually work for how his brain processes information. Your prestigious assessment center failed him. Your professional colleagues gave up on him. But this 8-year-old boy has proven that with the right support, children with learning differences can excel beyond anyone's expectations." Dr. Ashworth's face was now red with fury. This is exactly the kind of delusional thinking that damages these children. You've filled his head with impossible dreams. He will never succeed in a competitive academic environment. "He's already succeeding," Rosa replied simply. "Not for long." Dr. Ashworth snapped. "I'll be recommending to Westfield Preparatory that Timothy be removed from mainstream classes and placed in an appropriate special needs program. And I'll be reporting your interference to the proper authorities." The threat hung in the air, and Harrison watched his son's face crumple as he heard his academic future being decided by adults who seemed determined to limit his possibilities. And then Rosa Martinez, the woman who'd spent 6 years quietly maintaining their household, the trained educator who'd been dismissed as just the help, stood up straighter and delivered the line that would define everything that came next. "Dr. Ashworth," Rosa said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had found her moment of truth, "you can question my credentials, you can insult my profession, and you can try to intimidate this family. But you cannot look at a child who's achieving academic success and convince me that failure would serve him better. Your degrees are impressive, but they didn't teach Timothy to read. Your research papers are extensive, but they didn't help him believe in himself. Your prestigious center failed him completely, but this kitchen where I teach him that learning can be joyful instead of shameful, this kitchen has given him everything your system couldn't." Rosa's voice grew stronger, filled with the passion of every teacher who'd ever fought for a student others had given up on. "You call me just the help, Dr. Ashworth, but this help has proven that love, patience, and proper teaching methods can achieve what your expensive assessment said was impossible. So before you destroy a little boy's confidence to protect your professional ego, ask yourself this: what matters more, being right about his limitations or being wrong about his possibilities?" The room went completely silent. Dr. Ashworth stood speechless, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to respond to Rosa's quiet dignity and irrefutable logic. Timothy stopped crying and looked up at Rosa with complete adoration. And Harrison realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, not just a defense of his son, but a moment when someone who'd been invisible finally stepped into the light and revealed exactly who she'd always been. The confrontation was far from over, but the battle lines had been drawn, and Rosa Martinez had just proven that true authority comes not from titles or degrees, but from results, dedication, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between staying silent and speaking up for what's right? Have you ever witnessed someone's expertise being dismissed because of assumptions about their background or position? What gave them, or you, the courage to find their voice and stand up to unfair treatment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your stories of courage and supporting each other through life's challenges. Sometimes the most qualified people are the ones society overlooks, and the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The silence in Harrison's office stretched for what felt like an eternity before Dr. Ashworth finally found her voice, her face now a dangerous shade of red. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she sputtered, her composure completely shattered. "I will not be lectured by domestic staff about educational standards. Mr. Pemberton, if you don't put an immediate stop to this woman's interference, I will personally ensure that Timothy is removed from Westfield Preparatory and blacklisted from every reputable school in Manhattan. Harrison felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. The threat was real. Dr. Ashworth had the connections and influence to make good on it. But as he looked at his son clinging to Rosa's side, and saw the quiet dignity with which Rosa had defended both Timothy and herself, he realized he'd reached his own moment of truth. "Dr. Ashworth," Harrison said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built a tech empire, "I think it's time for you to leave my home." "Excuse me." Dr. Ashworth's voice rose to a near shriek. "Mr. Pemberton, you're making a serious mistake. This woman has filled your head with romantic nonsense about learning differences, but I'm offering you reality. Timothy needs professional intervention, not kitchen table fantasy from someone who... Someone who what?" Harrison interrupted, stepping between Dr. Ashworth and Rosa. "Someone who helped my son achieve straight A's when your professional colleagues told me he'd never read at grade level? Someone who gave him confidence in his abilities when your assessment center wanted to warehouse him in a special needs program." Dr. Ashworth's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mr. Pemberton, you're obviously emotionally compromised. But let me be very clear about what will happen if you continue down this path. I will contact the Department of Education about unauthorized teaching by unqualified personnel. I will inform Westfield Preparatory that Timothy's grades are the result of academic fraud. And I will ensure that every elite educational institution in this city knows that the Pemberton family cannot be trusted to maintain appropriate boundaries with their domestic staff." The threats hung in the air like daggers, each one designed to terrorize a wealthy parent into compliance. But Harrison had spent years in boardrooms where much more was at stake than one person's opinion, and he recognized manipulation when he saw it. "Timothy," Harrison said gently, "would you please go to your room for a few minutes? Miss Rosa and I need to finish talking with Dr. Ashworth." Timothy looked up at Rosa with worried eyes. "Miss Rosa, are you in trouble because of me?" Rosa knelt down to Timothy's eye level, her voice gentle but firm. "Me, Joe, you are never trouble. You are a gift. And sometimes adults need to have difficult conversations to protect the things that matter most. Go read your book, the one about the boy who discovered he could fly when he stopped believing he couldn't." Timothy nodded solemnly and left the room, but not before turning back to Rosa with complete trust in his eyes. "I love you, Miss Rosa." "I love you too, Timothy." As soon as Timothy was gone, Dr. Ashworth's mask of professional courtesy disappeared entirely. "How touching," she sneered. "The help thinks she's part of the family. Mr. Pemberton, this is exactly the kind of inappropriate boundary crossing I'm talking about. This woman has manipulated a vulnerable child and a grieving father into believing she's indispensable." Harrison felt his temper finally break. "Dr. Ashworth, Rosa didn't manipulate anyone. She saw a struggling child and used her professional expertise to help him succeed. The only manipulation happening here is your attempt to intimidate my family into accepting your assessment of my son's limitations." "Professional expertise?" Dr. Ashworth laughed harshly. "Mr. Pemberton, even if this woman's foreign credentials were legitimate, which I seriously doubt, she is not licensed to practice in New York State. What she's been doing constitutes unauthorized teaching, possibly educational fraud, and definitely a violation of the clear boundaries that should exist between domestic workers and the families who employ them." Rosa had remained silent during this exchange, but Harrison could see the pain in her eyes at having her qualifications questioned and her character attacked. "Furthermore," Dr. Ashworth continued, "I've seen this pattern before. Domestic staff who develop these inappropriate attachments to the children in their care often have ulterior motives. Perhaps Miss Martinez saw an opportunity to ingratiate herself with a wealthy family, to secure her position or gain access to resources she wouldn't otherwise have." "That's enough." Harrison's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Dr. Ashworth, you've insulted my son, attacked my employee, and threatened my family. It's time for you to leave." "I'm trying to save you from a very expensive mistake, Mr. Pemberton," Dr. Ashworth replied, her tone shifting to false concern. "When Timothy fails his standardized tests, when he struggles in higher-level coursework, when the artificial supports this woman has created are removed, you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you. And by then, the damage to his self-concept will be irreversible." Rosa finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Dr. Ashworth, what if you're wrong?" "I beg your pardon?" "What if you're wrong about Timothy? What if children with learning differences can excel when they're taught properly? What if the real damage comes from adults who tell them they're not capable of success?" Dr. Ashworth's face contorted with rage. "I am not wrong. I've been working in this field for 25 years. I've assessed thousands of children. I know the limitations of learning disabled students." "Then why," Rosa asked simply, "is Timothy succeeding?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Dr. Ashworth had no answer that didn't admit the possibility that her assessment methods, her assumptions, and her professional expertise might be flawed. "Because," Dr. Ashworth finally sputtered, "because you've been cheating. You've been doing his work for him. You've created an artificial environment that doesn't prepare him for real-world challenges." Harrison moved to his desk and picked up Timothy's homework folder, the one Rosa had been organizing for months. He opened it to reveal pages of Timothy's work, clearly in his own handwriting, showing progressive improvement over time. "This is Timothy's work, Dr. Ashworth. His handwriting, his ideas, his solutions. Rosa didn't do this for him, she taught him how to do it himself." Dr. Ashworth barely glanced at the papers. "Coaching can create the appearance of independent work while still constituting inappropriate assistance." "Then test him," Harrison said suddenly. "Right now. Give Timothy any assessment you want, with no assistance from Rosa or anyone else. If he fails, I'll accept your recommendations. But if he succeeds—" "Mr. Pemberton, that's not how proper assessment works." "If he succeeds," Harrison continued, "you owe my family, and especially Rosa, a public apology for your behavior today." Dr. Ashworth's eyes gleamed with confidence. "Fine. But when he fails this impromptu test, I want your word that you'll enroll him in an appropriate special needs program and end this charade immediately." "And I want your word," Harrison replied, "that if he succeeds, you'll withdraw your threats against his school placement and acknowledge that Rosa's methods are effective." "Deal." Dr. Ashworth's smile was predatory. "But we're going to do this properly. I'll call Timothy back in here, and I'll give him a reading comprehension and math assessment appropriate for his grade level. No assistance, no accommodations, no special tools or tricks. Just a child and an academic challenge." Rosa looked worried for the first time since the confrontation began. "Mr. Pemberton, Timothy hasn't been prepared for a formal testing situation. The anxiety alone could affect his performance." "Are you already making excuses?" Dr. Ashworth asked mockingly. "This is exactly what I expected. The artificial confidence you've built will crumble the moment he faces real academic pressure." Harrison looked at Rosa, seeing her concern for Timothy warring with her confidence in his abilities. "Rosa, what do you think? Can Timothy handle this?" Rosa took a deep breath, her teacher instincts taking over. "Timothy is capable of this work. But Dr. Ashworth is right about one thing. Formal testing situations can be challenging for children with learning differences, not because they don't know the material, but because the format itself can be intimidating." "Then he'll fail," Dr. Ashworth said smugly, "and we'll all understand the truth about his supposed academic improvement." Rosa's expression shifted, and Harrison saw the steel that had allowed her to stand up to Dr. Ashworth's attacks. "Actually, Dr. Ashworth, I think Timothy will surprise you. But first, let me ask you something. In your 25 years of experience, how many children with dyslexia have you seen overcome their learning challenges to achieve academic success?" Dr. Ashworth waved dismissively. "Dyslexic children can learn coping strategies, but they will always struggle with reading and writing. It's a neurological condition that requires lifelong accommodation." "So your answer is none," Rosa said quietly. "In 25 years, you've never seen a dyslexic child truly succeed academically. Because it's not realistic to expect." "Or," Rosa interrupted gently, "because you've never tried teaching methods that actually work for how their brains process information." The implication hit Dr. Ashworth like a slap. Rosa was suggesting that her 25 years of experience might actually be 25 years of reinforcing limitations rather than discovering possibilities. "How dare you?" "Dr. Ashworth," Harrison interrupted, "let's proceed with the test. Rosa, please call Timothy back in." As Rosa left to get Timothy, Dr. Ashworth pulled assessment materials from her briefcase, muttering about unprofessional behavior and inappropriate challenges to established expertise. But Harrison caught something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested Rosa's questions had hit their mark. When Timothy returned, he looked small and worried, clearly sensing the tension in the room. Rosa knelt beside him, speaking quietly. "Timothy, Dr. Ashworth would like to see some of your schoolwork. Just like when we practice at home, remember to take your time, think about what you know, and trust yourself." Dr. Ashworth set papers in front of Timothy with theatrical formality. "Timothy, I'm going to give you some reading and math problems. You must work completely on your own, with no help from anyone. Do you understand?" Timothy nodded nervously, his confidence from earlier completely evaporated in the face of Dr. Ashworth's intimidating presence. As Timothy began working, Harrison watched Dr. Ashworth's face, seeing her confidence gradually fade as the boy methodically worked through problems that should have been impossible for a child with his supposed limitations. The test would determine more than Timothy's academic placement. It would prove whether Rosa's methods were revolutionary or delusional, whether Dr. Ashworth's expertise was valid or outdated, and whether a child's potential was truly limitless or constrained by adult expectations. The stakes had never been higher, and everyone in the room knew it. 25 minutes later, Timothy set down his pencil and looked up at the adults who had been watching his every move. Dr. Ashworth immediately snatched the test papers, her face a mask of professional skepticism that gradually transformed into shock, then disbelief, and finally something approaching panic. This isn't possible," she whispered, flipping through the pages again and again as if the answers might change. Harrison leaned forward. "What are the results, Dr. Ashworth?" Dr. Ashworth's voice was barely audible. "Reading comprehension, 95%. Math, 98%. Writing sample, advanced level for his grade." The silence in the room was deafening. Timothy looked confused by the adults' reactions. "Did I do something wrong?" Rosa knelt beside him, her face glowing with pride. "No, Mijo. You did something absolutely wonderful. You showed everyone exactly how brilliant you are." Dr. Ashworth continued staring at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "But he's severely dyslexic. His file says he was reading at a kindergarten level just 8 months ago. Children don't make this kind of progress. It's not possible." "Apparently it is," Harrison said quietly. "Rosa, how do you explain Timothy's success?" Rosa stood, her professional demeanor returning as she addressed Dr. Ashworth directly. "Timothy succeeded because someone finally taught him that his dyslexia wasn't a limitation to overcome, but a different way of processing information that could be developed into a strength. Instead of focusing on what he couldn't do, we focused on what he could do exceptionally well. Dr. Ashworth shook her head violently. No. There has to be another explanation. He memorized the answers somehow, or, Rosa interrupted gently, your understanding of what's possible for children with learning differences is incomplete. The accusation hit Dr. Ashworth like a physical blow. Her entire professional identity was built on being the expert who assessed children's limitations and recommended appropriate interventions. Rosa was suggesting that her expertise might actually be preventing children from reaching their potential. Dr. Ashworth, Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who just witnessed his core beliefs vindicated, I believe you owe my family an apology. Dr. Ashworth's face cycled through anger, embarrassment, and something that looked like professional terror. If she was wrong about Timothy, how many other children had she mislabeled? How many potential success stories had been relegated to limited expectations because of her assessments? I need to review these results more carefully, she stammered. There are procedures for unusual cases. The only unusual thing here, Harrison replied, is that Timothy had access to a teacher who believed in his potential instead of his limitations. Timothy, who had been watching the adult conversation with growing confusion, suddenly spoke up. Miss Rosa, why is everyone so surprised? You always told me I was smart enough to do this work. Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she pulled Timothy into a gentle hug. Because, Mijo, not everyone understands that different kinds of minds can be brilliant in different ways. But now they're starting to learn. Dr. Ashworth gathered her materials with shaking hands, her earlier threats and condescension replaced by obvious humiliation. Mr. Pemberton, the test results are certainly unexpected. I'll need to file a report with my colleagues about this unusual case. You do that, Harrison replied. And Dr. Ashworth? I'll be sharing Timothy's story and Rosa's remarkable teaching methods with other parents who've been told their children have insurmountable limitations. I think they deserve to know what's actually possible. Dr. Ashworth's face went pale. The implication was clear. If Harrison publicized Timothy's transformation and Rosa's methods, it would raise uncomfortable questions about traditional assessment practices and the limitations placed on children with learning differences. Mr. Pemberton, I would advise caution about making broad claims based on one exceptional case. One exceptional teacher, Harrison corrected. Rosa, I'd like to discuss something with you after Dr. Ashworth leaves. As Dr. Ashworth gathered her belongings and headed for the door, she paused and turned back, her professional mask finally slipping completely. Miss Martinez, she said quietly, your methods are clearly effective. Perhaps we could discuss them sometime. Rosa nodded graciously. I'd be happy to share what I've learned, Dr. Ashworth. Every child deserves teachers who believe in their potential. After Dr. Ashworth left, Harrison felt a profound shift in his understanding of everything that had just transpired. He wasn't just witnessing his son's academic success. He was seeing the power of recognition, respect, and refusing to accept artificial limitations. Rosa, Harrison said, I have a proposition for you. Over the next hour, Harrison outlined a plan that would change not just their family, but potentially the lives of countless children struggling with learning differences. He wanted to create an educational foundation, with Rosa as the director, focused on developing and sharing teaching methods that actually worked for children with dyslexia and other learning differences. We'll get your credentials fully recognized, Harrison explained. We'll fund research into your methods. We'll train other teachers. And we'll make sure that no child has to struggle the way Timothy did just because adults don't understand how they learn. Rosa was overwhelmed. Mr. Pemberton, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Timothy interjected, bouncing with excitement. Say yes so other kids can have Miss Rosa teachers too. 3 weeks later, Harrison stood in his home office, but this time he wasn't alone. A camera crew from a national education program was setting up equipment while Rosa reviewed her notes for what would become a groundbreaking interview about innovative teaching methods for children with learning differences. The story had started simply. Harrison had shared Timothy's transformation on his social media accounts, praising Rosa's expertise and challenging other parents to look beyond traditional educational assessments. The post had gone viral within hours. The original post read, "6 months ago, experts told me my dyslexic son would never achieve academic success. Today, he's getting straight A's. The difference? A teacher who saw his potential instead of his problems. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone overlooks. #Believe in potential #Every child can learn." The response had been overwhelming. Parents from around the world shared their own stories of children dismissed by traditional educational systems. Teachers reached out asking about Rosa's methods. Educational researchers requested meetings to study her approach. But the most powerful response came from an unexpected source, Dr. Ashworth herself. Harrison's phone buzzed with a text message, "Mr. Pemberton, after reviewing Timothy's case and consulting with colleagues, I've recommended him for our gifted and talented program. Miss Martinez's methods deserve serious academic study. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Dr. Victoria Ashworth." As the camera crew finished their setup, Rosa appeared in the doorway, no longer wearing her housekeeper's uniform but dressed as the professional educator she'd always been. Timothy bounced beside her, clutching a certificate from his school recognizing him as Student of the Month. "Ready for this?" Harrison asked. Rosa smiled. The nervous housekeeper who'd feared losing her job transformed into a confident advocate for children everywhere. "I've been ready for this my whole career. I just needed someone to believe it was possible." The interview would air to millions of viewers, sparking a national conversation about hidden potential, the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of job titles, and the transformative power of believing in children society had written off. But in Harrison's home office, surrounded by the family that had found each other through unexpected circumstances, the real transformation had already taken place. Timothy was thriving academically and personally. Rosa was finally recognized for the gifted educator she'd always been. And Harrison had learned that the most important expertise often comes disguised as humble service. Timothy looked up at the camera and spoke with the confidence of a child who'd learned to believe in himself. "Miss Rosa taught me that being different isn't being broken. She taught me that my brain works like a special computer that can solve problems other people can't. And she taught me that the best teachers are the ones who see what you can do, not what you can't." Rosa knelt beside him, her voice warm with the love of every teacher who'd ever fought for a student. Every child has gifts waiting to be discovered. Sometimes we just need to look with different eyes and teach with open hearts. As the cameras rolled and their story began reaching families around the world, Harrison realized that this moment, this recognition of worth, potential, and the power of seeing people truly, would ripple outward in ways none of them could imagine. The maid who'd been invisible had become a movement. The child who'd been labeled as limited had become an inspiration. And the father who'd been blind to the gifts in his own home had become an advocate for seeing the extraordinary in the overlooked. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of recognition, respect, and the power of believing in hidden potential. If this story moved your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Your Stories with Goodness. Your support helps us share these transformative messages with families who need to hear them. Here's why your subscription matters so much to us. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you're not just supporting our channel, you're helping us reach another parent who's been told their child will never succeed, another teacher who's fighting for students others have given up on, another person whose gifts have been overlooked because of assumptions about their background or position. Your subscription literally changes lives by spreading these stories of hope and possibility. We're building something beautiful together here at Heartstring Stories, a community that believes in the extraordinary potential hiding in ordinary moments, that celebrates the helpers and healers who work quietly behind the scenes, and that refuses to accept that anyone's worth is determined by their job title or circumstances.